It was a warm Saturday afternoon in early summer, and the little diner at the corner of Maple Street was buzzing with soft chatter. The sun was shining through the glass windows, casting warm golden light across the tables. Families sat together, friends laughed over milkshakes, and the smell of freshly baked pies filled the air. Ethan sat by the window with his father, Mark, who had insisted on taking him out for lunch after a long week of school. Ethan was 16. He wasn't a troublemaker, just a curious teenager who loved taking photos of everything around him. He carried a small camera with him almost everywhere. He liked to capture details that other people didn't notice, the way light reflected on glass, how coffee steam rose in the sunlight, or the way someone's smile could brighten a whole room. To him, photography wasn't just a hobby. It was a way of freezing little pieces of the world. Mark, his father, was a quiet man in his late 40s. He had strong shoulders, kind eyes, and the calm voice of someone who had experienced many things in life, but didn't talk about them much. Ethan always wondered why his father avoided conversations about the years before Ethan was born. Mark had worked in the military, but he rarely spoke of those days. He said the past belonged to the past, and what mattered now was family. But deep down, Ethan could always sense a story hidden behind those quiet eyes. As they waited for their food, Ethan played with his camera, taking pictures of the diner's decor. The walls were decorated with old posters and black and white photos from the 1960s. A small jukebox sat in the corner, playing soft tunes from another time. It felt like stepping into a warm memory. Their waiter arrived a few minutes later. He was a tall man with gentle eyes and a soft, polite voice. His name tag read Lucas. His short, dark hair was neatly combed, and his uniform was simple but clean. He spoke very little, just enough to take their order with a small, practiced smile. Something about his quiet nature caught Ethan's attention. He wasn't rude or unfriendly, just distant, like someone who was there, but not fully present. When Lucas leaned forward to place their drinks on the table, Ethan noticed something on his forearm. A faint pattern peeked out from beneath the rolled edge of his sleeve. At first, Ethan thought it was just an old tattoo, but then he saw it more clearly, dark lines forming a symbol he didn't recognize. Surrounded by patches of pale, uneven skin, the kind that comes from burn scars, for a moment, Ethan froze. It wasn't the tattoo itself that surprised him, but the way it looked so personal, almost like it carried a story. The scars weren't fresh, but they were noticeable, twisting gently around the edges of the ink like waves around a rock. Lucas didn't seem to care that they were visible. He just moved quietly, doing his job. Ethan didn't say anything. He wasn't the kind of person to stare or make someone uncomfortable. But his photographer's instinct kicked in. As Lucas turned to walk away, Ethan lifted his camera and clicked. It wasn't planned. He had been trying to take a shot of the diner's warm lighting and, by accident, Lucas's arm with the tattoo ended up in the frame. The rest of the meal went on like any other. Ethan and his dad talked about school, weekend plans, and whether they should take a small road trip the next day. But in the back of Ethan's mind, the image of that tattoo stayed. Lucas returned with their food, setting down plates with a polite nod. "Enjoy your meal," he said softly. His voice had a calmness to it, the kind that felt almost protective. Ethan wondered what kind of person Lucas was. He didn't seem like someone who liked to talk about himself. There was a heaviness in his eyes, not sadness exactly, but the kind of weight people carry when they've lived through things they don't share with the world. As they ate, Ethan kept sneaking glances at Lucas. Every movement the waiter made was careful, almost rehearsed. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. His steps were steady, his hands firm, like someone who had learned to stay in control of himself no matter what. It was something Ethan had seen before in his father. "Dad," Ethan said quietly, between bites of his burger. "That waiter, he seems kind of different." Mark looked up. "Different how?" "I don't know," Ethan said, searching for the right words. "Like he's carrying something heavy." "You know." Mark smiled a little. The kind of smile grown-ups give when they think kids are just imagining things. "Everyone's carrying something, son. Some people just carry it more quietly." Ethan nodded, but that didn't make his curiosity disappear. After they finished eating, Ethan asked if he could take a few more photos around the diner before they left. Mark agreed, leaning back in the booth with a relaxed sigh. Ethan loved these small freedoms. He liked how his dad trusted him enough to let him explore without too many rules. He walked around the diner slowly, camera in hand, taking shots of tables, walls, and customers who didn't mind. At one point, he turned toward the counter where Lucas was standing. The man was refilling a tray of water glasses, his rolled-up sleeves slightly revealing more of the tattoo. The lighting from above cast a soft glow on the ink, making it stand out even more. Ethan raised his camera again and clicked. Lucas noticed him this time. Their eyes met. For a second, Ethan thought Lucas might get upset, but instead, the waiter gave a small, gentle nod, almost like he understood. Then he returned to his work without saying anything. Ethan lowered the camera slowly, feeling both guilty and fascinated. When they got back home that afternoon, the golden light had already begun to fade. Ethan went straight to his room, dropped his bag on the floor, and sat at his desk. He connected his camera to his laptop and began looking through the photos. Most of them were of the diner's interior, cozy, warm, ordinary. But then he stopped on one particular photo. It was the shot where Lucas's tattoo was clearly visible. The scarred skin around almost formed a frame, and the symbol itself stood out, strong, bold, and meaningful. Ethan zoomed in a little. The design looked like a set of wings wrapped around a star, with numbers and letters below it. He didn't understand what it meant, but it didn't look like a regular design someone would get just for style. It felt official, maybe even military. Dad, Ethan called out. Mark appeared at the door a moment later, holding a cup of coffee. What is it? Look at this, Ethan said, turning the laptop toward him. Mark stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as soon as he saw the image. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. His hand, holding the cup, froze midair. His jaw tightened slightly, a reaction Ethan had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was something else, something deeper, like recognition mixed with surprise. Where did you take this? Mark asked quietly. At the diner, Ethan said. Our waiter had this tattoo. I thought it looked interesting, so I took a picture. Do you know what it means? Mark stared at the image for a long moment. Then he set down the coffee cup slowly on Ethan's desk. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made Ethan's heart beat a little faster. Yes, Mark said. I know exactly what it means. Ethan leaned forward. You do? Mark nodded once, still staring at the photo. This isn't just a tattoo. It's a unit emblem, a very specific one. Ethan frowned. What kind of unit? Mark took a deep breath and sat down on the edge of the bed. Back when I was your age, I made a choice that changed my whole life. I joined the military, and for years, I served with a team of men who became like brothers to me. We had a symbol, this exact one. Not many people in the world have it, and the ones who do, we shared something that most people wouldn't understand. Ethan had always known his dad had a past in the military, but he had never seen him talk like this before. There was something in his father's eyes now, not just memory, but emotion, a soft ache, maybe even longing. So, Ethan said carefully, You know the guy at the diner? I don't know him, Mark said slowly, but if he has this tattoo, then he was part of the same unit. That's not something you just copy. Every line in that design means something. Ethan stared at his dad. But why didn't he say anything? People who carry this kind of past don't usually talk about it, Mark said, his voice softer now. Sometimes, it's easier to stay quiet. Ethan sat back, trying to process what he had just learned. The quiet waiter who had served them lunch wasn't just a regular man. He was connected to a part of his father's life that Ethan barely knew. It felt like he had stumbled into a secret story. Mark reached for the laptop again, zooming in on the scar around the tattoo. His expression shifted slightly, from surprise to something more personal. He's been through something, Mark murmured to himself. I can tell. Ethan didn't know exactly what his dad meant, but he could see that the photograph had stirred something inside him. The house felt a little different that evening, heavier, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of heaviness that comes from old memories waking up after a long sleep. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he kept thinking about Lucas. Who was this man who moved so quietly, carrying scars and a tattoo with a story? What had happened to him? Why did he end up working in a small diner? He also thought about his father, how a single photograph had made him look different. Younger in some ways, like a part of him had been pulled back into another time. It felt like a door had opened, a door Ethan didn't even know existed. Before falling asleep, Ethan decided something silently. He wasn't just curious about the tattoo anymore. He wanted to know the story. Mark sat quietly at the edge of the bed long after Ethan had gone to sleep. He hadn't seen that tattoo in years, the same design that once meant courage, brotherhood, and promises made between young men who trusted one another completely. It wasn't just ink. It was a symbol of a time that shaped who he became. Seeing it again felt like opening a box of memories that had been sealed away for too long. He thought about Lucas, the waiter with the quiet eyes and calm voice. A man who, without saying a single word, had reminded Mark of a chapter of his life he never spoke of anymore. Mark didn't know exactly what had happened to Lucas or how he ended up at a small diner. But one thing was certain. He needed to talk to him. The next morning was quiet. The sunlight slipped through the curtains in soft strips, and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Ethan sat at the table, scrolling through the photo on his laptop again, still amazed at how something so small could mean something so big. When Mark came downstairs, his expression was thoughtful but firm. "Ethan," he said gently, "let's go to the diner again." Ethan looked up, surprised. "Really? Why?" Mark didn't give a big explanation. "I just need to talk to someone." They drove down Maple Street in silence. Ethan could tell something was different about his dad. He wasn't nervous, but there was a quiet seriousness in the way he gripped the steering wheel. Ethan didn't ask more questions. He respected when his father needed space to think. The diner was less crowded that morning. A few regulars were sitting by the window, sipping their coffee and reading newspapers. The air smelled of warm toast and cinnamon rolls. The sunlight made the place look almost golden. It felt calm, like a place where nothing dramatic ever happened. But today, for Mark, everything felt different. Lucas was behind the counter, wiping down glasses with a clean cloth. He looked the same as the day before, neat, calm, distant. When his eyes lifted and met Mark's, there was a small flicker of recognition. Maybe he remembered them from the day before. Maybe something in Mark's face told him this wasn't just another customer visit. Mark walked toward the counter slowly, Ethan following behind. Lucas straightened up politely, giving the usual small smile that waiters give. "Good morning." Lucas said, "Morning," Mark replied. His voice was calm, but Ethan could tell there was something deeper underneath it. A pause followed, a soft, silent moment where the air between the two men felt heavier. Mark didn't waste time. He quietly spoke a few words that Ethan didn't fully understand, something short, a phrase that sounded like it belonged to another world. Lucas froze, the cloth in his hand dropping softly onto the counter. His face changed, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, powerful way, like someone who had just heard their name after years of silence. Lucas slowly rolled up his sleeve. This time, he didn't hide the tattoo. The black ink was clear now, wings, a star, numbers beneath it. It looked worn, as if it had carried years of stories. Mark nodded slowly, lifting the sleeve of his own arm just enough to show the same design. Though faded with time, for a few seconds, neither of them spoke. But in that silence, something real passed between them, a connection that didn't need words. Ethan stood there quietly, watching it unfold. He had never seen his dad look this way before. Not angry, not afraid, just deeply moved. Finally, Lucas spoke. His voice was soft but steady. "I didn't think I'd ever see someone from that time again." Mark let out a small breath. Neither did I. They didn't hug or shake hands right away. Instead, they sat down at a booth near the window, the same one Ethan and Mark had sat in the day before. Lucas brought them coffee, then sat across from Mark. It was strange for Ethan to see his dad and the quiet waiter sitting together like old friends. Even though they hadn't seen each other in years, you were part of the unit, Lucas said. Mark nodded. Yes, a long time ago. Lucas stared at the tattoo on his own arm, tracing it lightly with his fingers. I thought all of us were scattered. I didn't think anyone would even remember this anymore. Some things, Mark said softly, don't fade. Ethan listened closely, not wanting to interrupt. He didn't fully understand what they were talking about, but he could feel it was something big, something that mattered. Lucas looked down at his hands. After everything that happened, I disappeared. I didn't plan to. Life just took me in a different direction. Mark tilted his head slightly. You were gone. Everyone thought you didn't make it. Lucas gave a small, tired smile. That's what everyone was supposed to think. It was easier that way. I had to start over. I didn't want to bring the past with me. Mark was quiet for a moment, just letting the words sink in. Ethan watched his father's eyes soften. He could see that Mark wasn't judging him. He was listening with the kind of understanding that only comes from someone who's walked through something similar. I never stopped thinking about those days. Mark said finally, not in a loud way, just quietly, like an old echo. Lucas nodded. I did too, but I didn't think anyone else did. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. I didn't know Dad had this tattoo, he said carefully. He never told me. Mark looked at his son, and for the first time, there was no wall between his past and his present. It's not something I talk about, he admitted. Those were complicated years. Lucas glanced at Ethan with a gentle smile. He's lucky to have a son who pays attention. If it wasn't for that photo, this moment wouldn't even be happening. Ethan felt his cheeks warm. He hadn't meant to do anything big. He had just taken a picture, but somehow it had brought two people together who hadn't seen each other in decades. The conversation between Mark and Lucas continued slowly, like a river finding its way back to the ocean. They talked about old days, not in great detail, but enough for Ethan to piece together that they had once trained together. They had shared long nights, strong bonds, and promises made when they were much younger. Lucas shared how, after an incident years ago, he had left everything behind. He didn't go into painful details, and Mark didn't push him to. Instead, they focused on how life had changed since then. Lucas spoke about how he had moved from place to place, always staying quiet, always trying to build a simple life. Working at the diner had been his way of staying close to something peaceful. Mark shared how he had eventually left that world to build a family and learn to keep the past folded inside his heart like an old letter, not forgotten, but not spoken about. Ethan watched all this with quiet amazement. To him, his dad had always just been Dad. He never imagined him as a young man with brothers in arms, wearing tattoos that carried secret meanings. He never imagined that one of those brothers would be standing right in front of him, serving coffee in a small diner. After a while, Lucas excused himself to serve a customer, but before he walked away, he looked at Mark. I never expected to meet anyone from back then, he said softly. Thank your son for that photo. It's strange how something so small can open a door you thought was closed forever. Mark looked at Ethan with a gentle smile. Yeah, he said. It really is. When Lucas returned, they talked a little more, this time with less distance. There were soft smiles, light jokes, and a sense of comfort that slowly replaced the silence. Ethan felt like he was watching two people rediscover a part of themselves they had almost forgotten. Eventually, it was time to leave. The sun was higher now, shining brightly on the diner's glass windows. Mark stood up, and so did Lucas. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two men who had once walked the same path, now meeting again after years of silence. Lucas extended his hand. Mark took it firmly. The handshake wasn't just polite. It was meaningful. It carried everything they didn't say out loud. The memories, the bond, the respect. Take care of yourself, Mark said quietly. You too, Lucas replied. And thank you for coming back. As they walked out of the diner, Ethan glanced back. Lucas was standing by the counter, watching them leave with a faint smile. For the first time since Ethan had seen him, Lucas didn't look distant. He looked lighter, as if a weight he carried for years had lifted just a little dot in the car. Ethan finally spoke. "Dad, what was all that about?" Mark didn't rush his answer. He took a moment, looking out the windshield at the quiet street. "It's about friendship," he said. "The kind that doesn't disappear, even when people do." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding more than his father probably realized. That day wasn't just about a tattoo. It was about the hidden chapters of people's lives. The ones no one talks about but that shape who they are. Over the next few weeks, they visited the diner a few more times. Lucas was always there, serving with that same calm smile. But now, when Mark walked in, Lucas's eyes lit up a little. Sometimes they talked quietly in a corner booth, sharing old stories in soft voices. Other times, they just exchanged a nod that said everything without saying anything at all. Ethan started to notice small changes in both men. Lucas seemed less distant, like he was slowly letting the world in again. Mark, too, seemed lighter. It was as if reconnecting with someone from his past had given him permission to breathe more freely in the present. One evening, as they left the diner after another quiet visit, Mark put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You know," he said softly, "I spent years trying not to think about that part of my life. I thought closing the door was the only way to move forward. But sometimes the past doesn't.